All right, thank you, Rennie. I always forget to do that. And we're so honored to have the NOAA Administrator, Dr. Rick Spinrad, as our speaker today. But before we get started, just going to go over some housekeeping. The first is, of course, this meeting will be recorded so that folks who can't join us today can join in the fun belatedly and hopefully have an adult beverage if they'd like to later on. Please stay on mute just for the sort of speaking portions of it, and then unmute yourself when we do the breakout sessions afterwards so you can get to know everybody. Ask any questions in the chat while we're having the kind of discussion and Q&A with Dr. Spinrad. And as always, please provide any feedback at espadvisor.com/oceanblue. So we're gonna have a few opening remarks from Dr. Spinrad and then have some questions and answers based on the responses that you provided when you registered. And then we'll go into the breakouts. So I'm going to pass it to Rennie for some introduction and we'll get started.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And once again, please don't hesitate to send us ideas for what events to do in the future. We want to make sure that this platform is useful to everybody and that we can start to begin those happy hour mix-up sessions again. My name is Rennie Myers. I work for Ørsted North America, which is an offshore wind developer working on our federal advocacy, particularly around ocean conservation and maritime policy. Before that was with National Science Foundation and House Transportation Infrastructure as a Knaus Fellow. We're really so grateful that to start off the year, we have Dr. Spinrad as Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere and the 11th NOAA Administrator. Dr. Spinrad is responsible for the strategic direction and oversight of NOAA, including developing the agency's portfolio of products and services to address the climate crisis, enhancing environmental sustainability, fostering economic development, and creating a more just, equitable, and diverse and inclusive NOAA workforce. Dr. Spinrad has served in many ocean-related leadership roles at Oregon State University, the Office of Naval Research, the Office of the Oceanographer of the Navy, NOAA's Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, NOAA's National Ocean Service, list goes on. Dr. Spinrad received his BA in Earth and Planetary Sciences from the Johns Hopkins University and his MS and PhD in Oceanography from Oregon State University. So thank you so much for being with us again, everybody, and especially Dr. Spinrad, thank you so much. We'd love to hear your opening remarks about your hopes for 2022 and the future of ocean climate action.
Well, let me start, Rennie and Emily, by thanking you all, but especially both of you for setting this up. When I got the invitation to participate in this happy hour, there was no question I wanted to do that. Without even knowing a whole lot about who the audience would be and what the subject would be, the concept is something that is really valuable, especially in these COVID times when we don't have enough opportunity to really engage in the various cocktail hours and meetings that usually happen in DC. And then I got even more excited as I looked at the list of attendees and folks who intended to participate. Boy, so many old friends, shipmates, cohorts in crime, colleagues from every sector. Really appreciate that. It's such a pleasure to see all of you and so many folks that I haven't had a chance to meet yet. Look forward to meeting in the future. And I do want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the kind of direction that we're trying to build into NOAA, but I thought I'd start by sharing with you just a quick story about how I ended up here in what is my third tour of duty at NOAA and my fourth job. And I end up being the only NOAA administrator who actually was a career NOAA assistant administrator in two different line offices. So that's part of the story of how I ended up here. But the real story begins when NOAA was first established in the 70s. And I was pretty young. I was a college kid. And I remember thinking, what a great idea to set this organization up. I hope someday I could get a job in that organization. Never expecting that I'd actually be at the helm. And so was deeply honored when I was asked by the Biden-Harris administration to consider being nominated. And then, of course, you go through that crazy process of nomination, the most important part of which was my interview with Secretary Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce. It was really interesting because what became abundantly clear to me is the substantive objectives that I wanted to bring to the agency based on everything I knew about the agency and based on what I saw as opportunities were really around environment, the economy, and equity. Those are the bumper stickers. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But I also knew that there were a lot of folks that were being considered for this job, many of them a lot smarter, a lot cleverer, a lot better connected than I was. But when I talked with Secretary Raimondo, I said to her, I think what I can guarantee you is that I can hit the ground running. I know where the cafeteria is. I know where the knobs and dials are. You don't have to explain to me the difference between OAR and NOS. I do know the agency. And because I was lucky enough to work in Navy for many years as a civilian, different parts of Navy, worked in all of the various interagency groups, I know the culture of the other agencies in town. I know how to work with Congress. And I understand the nuanced nature of a dialogue with appropriators and a dialogue with authorizers. And so really the message was, I think I can hit the ground running. Boy, I didn't have any idea how much we were gonna have to, or be able to hit the ground running. My 6th day on the job, I was basically told, okay, time to formulate the FY23 budget. What are your priorities? And I remember thinking, boy, if somebody had come into this job without an understanding of budget formulation or what NOAA was capable of, or what the respective swim lanes were of the many other agencies working in environmental issues, formulating a $7 billion budget was a daunting undertaking, to say the least. And that's the day that it hit me that maybe we can get this to work. Maybe we can make things happen. And so in that context, I shared within NOAA and have subsequently been sharing in well over 100 external meetings since I came on board at the end of June, 3 fundamental priority objectives for the agency writ large. And I know we're here to talk ocean blue, but I think you're going to be able to see that the focus on ocean as it relates to these 3 objectives is pretty clear cut. And oh, by the way, I don't view this in an ocean part of NOAA and a weather part. It is an Earth system. I've even put 2 jars on my desk and told people when they say wet side or dry side, they got to put $1 in one or the other jars. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear Earth system. So within the Earth system, what we're really talking about is establishing NOAA's role as the authoritative source in the federal government for climate products and services in what I call a mission agnostic manner. Now, what does that mean? Well, think about weather. By legislation, by regulatory authority, NOAA's National Weather Service is the authoritative source for weather, climate, or weather products and services. Think about navigational charts. The National Ocean Service is that authoritative source. Think about stock assessments. The National Marine Fisheries Service of NOAA is that authoritative source. We need to establish NOAA's role as that authoritative source for climate products and services. Now, does that have organizational implications? Maybe, but quite honestly, I'm less concerned with that than I am with getting the products and services out, getting those capabilities well understood so that we can work with our colleagues in Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, Department of Transportation, as well as the private sector, as well as local municipalities, and be clearly established as that authoritative source. The second major objective is balancing our strong history and responsibilities in environmental stewardship with new business development, economic opportunities. I call the blue part of this the new blue economy. It's building out an economy, a knowledge-based economy, based on our capability to observe, monitor, predict the ocean. Years ago, people realized, hey, we've got an improved skill in being able to forecast different aspects of the ocean: sea surface temperature, currents, ocean pH. Is this useful information? The answer is, of course it is. Just as commercial weather recognized taking the publicly provided weather information and adding value, tailoring that product to the needs of a number of different communities was extremely valuable. This is the area that I think is really going to explode. I think we see an opportunity to build out this economy in a way that will be probably an order of magnitude larger than what we've seen in commercial weather. And I become more and more convinced of this every day. Like I said, I've had about 100 meetings with external groups, external agencies. About 70 of those have been with private sector groups or NGOs who are looking at opportunities for new products and services. And I'm not talking about, if you will, the traditional groups. And I would consider things like insurance and reinsurance relatively traditional. We've been working with them for decades. I'm talking about meeting with the president of the American Medical Association. I'm talking about meeting with the National Association of Realtors, with the American Society of Heating, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration Engineers. Every one of those calls that I've had starts with them saying, not really sure why you want to talk with us. And every one of those calls ends with them saying, boy, we really want to work with you on the development of new, we need you to understand what our needs and requirements are. American Medical Association really, really cares about having improved harmful algal bloom forecasts for coastal communities, for example. So there is this rich, potent opportunity for building out a new economy. And we sit in the Department of Commerce, for crying out loud. So you've heard the president talk about climate change means jobs. Well, this is the manifestation of that thinking specific to ocean-related jobs in the new blue economy. That's the second key objective. The third key objective is building equity into everything that we do, both in looking into the agency in terms of diversifying the workforce, providing equitable opportunity, being inclusive, and external, it means being much more attentive to providing not just providing products and services to vulnerable, underserved communities, geographically, socioeconomically, but also engaging early on and effectively so that we can co-develop products and services in a much more equitable fashion. When you take those three objectives and try to build them into what NOAA will look like in the future, it has extraordinary implications for everything from our program priorities to our infrastructure. And so you can see where I'm going with this. The passage of IIJA, which is now the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, has afforded NOAA close to $3 billion to be spent over 5 years to up our game. Up our game with respect to our ability to provide observations, up our game with respect to helping coastal communities understand how to be more resilient. And you'll see when our budgets get released that we're trying to take advantage of leveraging that those BIL resources so that we can not consider the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law a 5-year windfall, kind of a peak and a drop, but actually a rebaselining in our capability to do these critical services for the public. And in fact, building the economy, doing it equitably, serving as the nation's authoritative source for those climate products and services is a pretty lofty goal. We can't do it ourselves, so we're working across the board with our other federal agency partners. And one of the objectives in that area, and this will be my last point before we open it up, is to ensure that as this nation addresses the crisis that is climate change, that we attend to the issues of resilience and adaptation with the same sort of strength and fortitude of effort as we are attending to the issues associated with mitigation. Now, what do I mean by that? If you look at the current agenda, there's a lot of emphasis on decarbonization, on renewable energy, on mitigating the causes associated with climate change, all of which makes sense as a tax-paying citizen. I'm delighted to see that. But as I shared with Gina McCarthy, the president's domestic climate advisor and head of the Climate Policy Office, we've also got to look at the issues of resilience and adaptation. And so this is another important point, is how visible can NOAA be in carrying that message. And I'm delighted to say that by virtue of the strengths of NOAA's program, we have been able, both in the international scene, as reflected by the fact that in the whole senior US delegation that went to Glasgow for COP26, there were many, many cabinet members, 2 sub-cabinet officials, Samantha Power from USAID and myself. That was a reflection of the administration's recognition of NOAA's ability to go into the international domain, bring programs, products, services, and engage globally in a way that serves important domestic needs, but also serves the needs of the world. Domestically, I've been asked to serve as a Department of Commerce representative on the National Climate Task Force, chaired by Gina McCarthy, and serving at the cabinet level. So last week, when I talk about raising the issues of resilience and adaptation, it was in my role as a Department of Commerce representative to the National Climate Task Force to make sure they understood that NOAA is here to serve this purpose for all applications, whether it's dealing with drought, wildfires, flooding, extreme heat, coastal resilience. All of those issues are within NOAA's domain for providing products and services. So again, in the context of climate services, in the context of ocean-based solutions for climate services, in the context of new business development, in the context of equity, NOAA is being afforded a position and a megaphone, if you will, to make the arguments that we need to make. And hopefully with these budgets that we're seeing and things like the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're getting the resources that we need to make some real progress. And my challenge within NOAA has been, find me a community that will not be the beneficiaries of all these products and services. Nobody's been able to, because when you think about it, the things that we're talking about doing impact every aspect of society, of our economy, of our culture. So we're going to keep working. We're going to keep fighting the good fight. We're going to do it in a very forward-leaning manner and close collaboration with our partners. I just signed an MOU today with Ponch, the director of the National Science Foundation, to do a whole bunch of things. It's, I believe, the 5th MOU that I've signed since I arrived with another federal agency. So a lot going on there. We got a lot of interesting partnerships we can develop in the private sector. Going to keep doing all the good stuff we have been doing through Sea Grant, through the RISAs, through our number of university engagements. And let me just wrap up there by saying that hopefully what I've been able to convey here in a few minutes is some of the substance of what we're trying to do, but also the enthusiasm. And my enthusiasm is reflective of what you'll see in 12,000 employees at NOAA, that we got a terrific workforce, eager to move out, eager to do all the things that I just talked about. And let me say, because I know there's at least a handful of former NOAA folks at every level in the audience here. And I can say this somewhat uniquely because I've worked with so many of you over the last 20 years. We couldn't have done this without the extraordinary history of NOAA over the last several years. And I probably go back farther than most people on the call, but one of the first calls I made when I was confirmed was to John Byrne. Some of you may remember John Byrne was the NOAA administrator, actually in the Reagan administration, and as a personal colleague of mine back at Oregon State. And I did that intentionally because I wanted to thank John for all the work he had done as NOAA administrator, and all the way through John Byrne, John Knaus, Jim Baker. I won't embarrass myself by calling everyone out because I'm sure I'll miss one person, and I don't want to do that. But the workforces at NOAA have provided the fuel and the extraordinary foundation for the agency to be able to move forward in the ways that I've just described. So Emily, Rennie, let me stop there and open it wide for conversation. Give myself a chance to get a drink of water here too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spinrad. That was really interesting, enlightening. It was so great to hear about your priorities going forward, especially those 3 key. I was taught early on, always have to have 3 People always forget number 4.
Right.
So we're going to move into kind of question answer just to keep things simple. We have drafted questions that summarize most of the topics and questions that all the participants submitted when they registered. So first one about diversity, equity, inclusion. So happy to hear that equity is one of your top 3 priorities. For your mission at NOAA. Of course, it's very important. It's a lot of work needs to be done in this space. We've talked to Admiral Gallaudet when he was at the agency about this extensively, and he's such a champion for it also. So really appreciate that. Top of mind, of course, this week is the House considers the America Competes Act, which is, really focusing on building diversity in STEM in the United States. I just want to recognize we have a problem with diversity in STEM, particularly in ocean sciences. So what are you doing as the leader of NOAA to diversify NOAA's workforce now, and also to set up those pipelines so that we have folks ready to come in and continue the mantle when folks retire?
Yeah, thank you for that. We could probably spend an hour or 2 talking about that particular issue. There are a couple of ways to come at this, and I'm going to address your question both in terms of what we're doing internally for workforce and what we're doing externally. So when you look externally, the obvious answer is to first go in and find out what the nature of the problem is. And so we have spent the better part of the last year doing a number of listening sessions, doing service assessments, equity service assessments. How are our sea level products serving coastal communities from an equity perspective? We've done 8 climate and equity roundtables around the country, thematically oriented. So drought, wildfire, flooding, and we've made a specific effort to bring in vulnerable community representatives, tribal representatives. We brought in clergy to talk about how they are seeing the problems that are emerging. From these roundtables now, we have developed a set of pilot projects which are currently under review internally to demonstrate how we might do a better job in co-developing and delivering products in a much more equitable fashion. Within NOAA, we established a NOAA Climate Council early on, which reports directly to me and is made up of the senior leadership of each of the line offices. And we recognized one of the most important things for us to do as we build out programs is to understand what is the equity framework that we're trying to establish for both new programs and extant programs. And so we've written and posted an equity framework for our climate efforts to tell the world that we intend to do things differently in that regard. So part of this is getting smart and listening. Part of it is engaging with many, many different groups, and of those over 100 meetings I've talked about, many of them have been with representatives of underserved communities and vulnerable communities to do the same sort of listening I just described. Internally, I believe you can do certain things to diversify. You can establish policies, you can establish practice, you can make sure that searches incorporate equity as an important consideration. I will tell you, if you look at the workforce, the workforce of appointees that we've established within my headquarters, 80% of the people that we brought in into these positions are women, and 60% are minorities and people of color. And that is by design. These are extraordinary people reflective of America. And the goal here, of course, is to make sure that the workforce at NOAA looks like the American populace. And so we can either wait generations for that to happen, or we can move out aggressively in our hiring practices, in our promotion and retention practices, and also engage and also use some of our existing programs. We have an education partnership program with minority serving institutions. Can we use that more aggressively with some of our direct hire authority? Answer, yes. Okay, so we've got people looking into how to take advantage of these legislative authorities that we have in conjunction with established programs that are directly aimed at the next generation of NOAA employees. So those are just a few answers. And yes, you're right. Legislative solutions like the Competes Act and others are very helpful, can be very helpful in terms of sort of kicking us in the butt and getting these programs started. But we've got a lot of good ideas, and those are just a few examples of the very substantive things that we are doing.
Excellent, thank you. So keeping with the sort of legislative equity thread, what are your plans for implementation of the infrastructure bill, the IIJA/BIL/ any number of the acronyms that I'm sure we'll cycle through for the legislation? And particularly when it comes to ocean observations and resilience, what are your plans to work with public-private partnerships to make sure you're leveraging those federal dollars to do and involve as many actors as possible, or to continue the equity thread, improve access for more communities into NOAA funding and understanding how those processes work?
Yeah, thanks for that. So the short answer is I can't talk about that because our spend plans are still under review, but the more relevant answer, of course, is there's been no shortage of unsolicited advice coming into my email from many of those groups. And we take all that advice under consideration in developing our spend plans. It's been very clear, the administration has made very clear that our spend plans for the infrastructure bill will incorporate that lens of equity that I alluded to. So and also emphasize the real importance of ensuring that the work that we undertake with these resources is part and parcel and completely consistent with the abundant administration initiatives, America the Beautiful, Justice 40, the initiatives that have expressed the goals that we want to try to achieve, whether it's conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030, or ensuring that we've balanced our renewable energy portfolio with a conservation portfolio. So we are building spend plans with that as a primary consideration, in much the same way that one of the first filters, if you will, that we put these resources through when we build the spend plans was how does this dollar and this program leverage what we are currently doing in IUs, in our climate predictions, in our National Centers for Environmental Information. So it's leveraging extant capability, because let's be honest, $3 billion is a nice chunk of change, but we're spending $5-6 billion a year already. So how do you leverage that 5 or 6 billion with these resources? How do you make it completely consistent with the highest level objectives that the administration has expressed for conservation, for equity, and for climate, moving forward on addressing the climate crisis?
Emily, I'm going to jump in just one moment here. I think one thing that was done differently in the last budget that was really helpful, I think, especially from an external perspective, was sort of calling out additional issue areas where that little extra bit of funding can get you the extra mile and help identify within the agency, you know, this is really what the need is tied to, and really put some names to the numbers. I thought that was a really helpful way to help communicate the value of public dollars that are going into the work that NOAA is already doing and could do additional work within if given the sufficient capacity.
Yeah, and you know, Rennie, I'm glad you raised that, because I didn't address the other part of your question is how are we doing this in concert with both our public partners, mostly on the federal side, but with other partners as well. So needless to say, the role of OSTP and the newly reinvigorated Ocean Policy Committee are going to be critical in how we figure out our dollar is leveraging a DOE dollar, is leveraging an interior dollar. And then the other part of this, of course, is the really aggressive approach we're taking at NOAA. We're doing listening sessions with a number of economic sectors. We just did one with the architecture and engineering sector. We're going to do one on the new blue economy here soon. We did one with the reinsurance and insurance sector. We'll do tourism and recreation down the line. And part of this, it's not just to say, hey, what do you need? Part of it is, what do you bring to the table? What do you have that we can build off of? And it's interesting what comes out of these is these sectors have a lot of capability that I think we could exploit a little bit more effectively. You know, leveraging's funny. I argue that we're leveraging the industry. and they'd argue, yeah, they're leveraging NOAA. That's fine. I think that's completely appropriate. But are there observational capabilities that the transportation system has that we could take advantage of? So that's the other thing is this NOAA Climate Council that I alluded to. We originally set that up saying, hey, let's talk to ourselves about what we're doing here. And then we suddenly realized we ought to be talking to others too. So I've used my bully pulpit as an Undersecretary of Commerce to invite Secretary Pete Buttigieg to send his folks to come talk to us about what is transportation doing. We've talked with Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry's office. So State Department has come over and talked with us. So we're not just relying on the structure of interagency meetings for OSTP and OMB and others. We're also saying, let's do a little outreach on our own. And in fact, I just invited the president's climate advisor, Gina McCarthy, to come talk with the group as well. So that's another way to ensure that we're really working these connections and leveraging each other.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you so much. Next question, we're going to pivot to seafood. What are your goals for aquaculture development? In particular, would love to hear about the work of the Subcommittee on Aquaculture and the Economic Development Task Force, and also just generally growing U.S. sustainable seafood production in this administration. And just a little follow on kind of what are the challenges and opportunities you see in that growth?
So, let's start with a few truisms. The current economic structure with respect to seafood in this country has to change. We are so dependent on imports, and those imports are predominantly from aquaculture, derived from aquaculture. We need to take a good solid look at how we can do a better job. But I also firmly understand the challenges, the economic challenges, the ecological and environmental challenges associated with that. And as many of you on this call know, there's some pretty divergent views on the Hill about how to do that. So we are primarily a science agency, and my belief is it's incumbent on us to thoroughly wring out the potential, the options, which is why the aquaculture opportunity areas, as currently defined, represent, in my opinion, exactly that, a real opportunity to demonstrate the art of the possible. Oh, by the way, I don't want to separate the aquaculture question from a food security perspective from the climate question, because as so many, not the least of which would be Jane Luchenko, have demonstrated that there's a blue carbon aspect to aquaculture that we can take advantage of. So I've just done a 100-mile-an-hour run through some of the technical issues that the subcommittee is addressing right now. A lot of very dedicated people on the Hill are trying to iron out some pretty divergent views from members on how we do this. And when you look at the source of those divergent views, it comes down to economic risk, and it comes down to environmental risk. And I, forever the optimist, I believe that if we do a number of important pilot projects in a number of diverse selected areas with a number of diverse different kinds of species, we can start to get the answers that the policymakers need in order to say, let's move forward here, let's not do that, let's do this. So, I'm trying to thread the needle a little bit because as a scientist, I see real potential there. I am a physical scientist, not a social scientist. And so I rely on people who understand the economics and the cultural issues to weigh in and advise accordingly. But we're going to do the best we can to make sure we get the scientific information to answer some of those other questions.
Awesome, thank you. So coming back to this idea of interagency coordination, it's really interesting and exciting to hear that sort of NOAA is trying to, as you were saying, use your bully pulpit and really convene, because you already have so many intersecting responsibilities and authorities, your own sort of interagency working groups. But between the OPC and the NOP and the SOST, there's so many opportunities and mandates for federal interagency coordination on science, on data collection, and ocean climate action. So how do you hope to collaborate with other agencies of jurisdiction to advance key presidential goals? So offshore wind, the 30 by 30 gigawatt goal. Well, I think we're looking for the key to the success of the industry is really interagency coordination in so many ways, or blue carbon sequestration, metrics there, decarbonization of the maritime transportation industry. So what for you are the biggest challenges, opportunities, and concerns you see with implementing this vision, and where can those interagency working groups really help everyone take the next step forward?
Yeah, I really like that question, because let me start by saying I will question the premise that you used, that there is this sort of effort on NOAA to try to build alliances independent of what's happening in the larger interagency world. I don't see it that way. I see that there is a real value in the large group interagency activity of the OPC, the Ocean Science Committee, the Ocean Resource Committee, to do what can only be done with everybody at the table. And I say that from personal experience. I was one of the first co-chairs of what we then called the Joint Subcommittee on Ocean S&T, when we wrote the nation's first plan for ocean research. You couldn't do that unless you had NASA, Navy, NOAA, NSF, Coast Guard, Interior, all at the table to have that discussion. So there really is critical value to that. And, not but, and there's value to the bilateral discussions as well. It's not unlike global discussions. You're going to go to the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission to talk about things like a global tsunami warning system. You want to make sure everybody has the right standards and priorities, but then you're going to do bilateral agreements with individual countries in the same way in working the interagency piece. And offshore wind is a really good one. Yes, the principles on how we balance the administration's priorities and agendas for conservation on the one hand and renewable energy on the other hand, those principles need to be discussed around the table with everyone there. Then when you start saying, yeah, but how are we going to ensure that leasing a part of the ocean to do offshore wind is done in a way that is completely consistent with conserving that part of the ocean as a marine protected area. And you find out that the groups that really have the equities in that are primarily NOAA and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And that's when you say, let's get NOAA and BOEM to sit down and hammer out who does what needs to happen for siting, what needs to happen for permitting. And so there's real value, I think, in the interagency world establishing the principles, the guiding principles and the operating principles. And then the programmatic agreements often can happen in these bilateral or trilateral agreements. And I could give you dozens of similar examples where those kinds of agreements, NOAA's work with marine mammals and working with the Navy is another really good example, where you want to make sure that the mission objectives of those two agencies are not compromised, but that there's a good understanding of who needs to do what, when, and how. And yeah, it's got to be within a broader context of interagency discussion. But in this case, those two agencies are the ones that have 99% of the equities and issues. So I really believe, done right, the roles and responsibilities of the OPC, for example, and its subordinate bodies are driving the efficiencies of the bilateral and trilateral agreements between individual agencies.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, and I think I'll save my editorializing for the Q&A.
Thank you. Our next question, we want to circle back to the new blue economy. Lots of folks wanted to hear more about your views on this. Especially, you were pretty specific in your opening remarks, and really appreciate that. Blue economy is one of those terms that, we all have heard for a long time, and I appreciate new blue economy. I really love your vision of it being even, orders of magnitude larger than the weather enterprise. I think that's really exciting. And I think that's what many of us in this community see. I'm going to shout out to Alan Leonardi based on a discussion we were having just last week. So this is an idea stolen from him, from COL, but this idea of a missing demand signal, that the idea that kind of the investors are ready, the companies are ready, everyone's kind of ready to go, but they're looking for someone to lead the charge or show that demand signal. I think that's, a role that the federal government can play and really spur this. So would love to hear your thoughts on specifically how do we provide that demand signal to build the new blue economy?
Yeah, it's a great question, not surprising from Alan. And part of this is, I would say, in thinking carefully about the roles and responsibilities. So I would argue the demand signal is being defined through a lot of these kinds of listening sessions and discussions that we're talking about. And it turns out that every sector you could imagine can identify a requirement. I'll use demand signal synonymously with the idea of a top level requirement for some kind of predictive product or service associated with ocean observations, ocean modeling, ocean prediction. The bigger challenge, I think, is not so much defining the demand signal, and in fact, I use the Integrated Ocean Observing System has done these kinds of assessments with, and this is really a great reason for being inside of the Department of Commerce. When you look at all of the business statistics and business economics expertise that we have accessible within the Department of Commerce, we've now done a couple of assessments of the growth potential for this market, which is the signal, I think. I think the bigger issue is making sure that we go down this path with our eyes open and do it right, compared to the way we did commercial weather, which was not done all that well. There were some real sticky issues associated with what constitutes competition by the public sector with the private sector. So let's not relearn that. Let's make sure we understand this, and then let's establish these terms of reference. And that's what I would like to see us at NOAA take a lead doing. The market analysis is going to be done by a number of outside people. We can then establish what are the rules of the road with respect to the use and provision of private data. What are the delimitations of, down to the brass tacks, resolution of predictive products, for example, availability of products, use and reuse, like I said, of privately provided data. There's some really great new ideas. I try not to single out groups, but Saildrone's approach right now to data as a service presents some very interesting questions with respect to public-private relationships in supporting the development of the new blue economy. This is why we need help from professional economists. I used to say the big problem was getting capital, but capital is showing up. There's at least one company in this space right now that just got a C round investment of $100 million. That tells you the signal is there, incidentally. I really believe the market will bear. Investors are pretty savvy about where the market has potential. But I get scared with the idea that, do we have it sorted out? Do we understand what this emerging business sector, the allowable business models will be in that emerging business sector? And so I'm trying to find the right forum for having this discussion. Of the 65 people on the call here, if you've got some ideas on how to do this. Just last week, I took advantage of the American Meteorological Society annual meeting and did a fireside chat with some of these investors and companies, startups, to try to lay out what the guiding and operating principles will be. So I think that's the way it plays out. And again, learning lessons from other sectors is going to be critical in this effort.
Yeah, there's so much to say on that issue. I think, particularly because, at least in my professional capacity, thinking about how we build out clean energy infrastructure in a way that is explicitly supportive of developing the right ocean observational data in a way that feeds into our public models to poses challenges as much as it is the perfect opportunity. And so really appreciate that comment. And I think we have a couple of questions entering the chat that at the very least we would love to discuss offline in the future.
Yeah.
But final, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, happy to do that offline. Appreciate it.
Great. So final question, it's the 50th anniversary of so many ocean policies, Clean Water Act, Coastal Zone Management Act, Ocean Dumping Act, often forgotten, Marine Sanctuaries Act, and of course the MMPA, Marine Mammal Protection Act. So what role, have they played in today's ocean policy landscape and shaping that landscape? And what are your hopes for this regulatory and legislative legacy in the next 50 years? What do you hope that, NOAA will be able to put forward as in the new blue economy and within this administration?
Well, the obvious answer is that we will avert the climate crisis. And that's going to, we can't just say, hey, maybe we'll pass a law and that'll solve that. That's going to require, and there is such incredible thinking about these issues up on the Hill, incredibly good and deep and thorough thinking about these issues, and within the agencies and within academia and among the NGOs. But I think, as the single most important answer, I won't be around in 50 years. Most of you will be. Many of you will have kids or grandchildren, and what do you expect we will be leaving for them? I can tell you that as a result of things like Clean Water Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act, the environment that we're living in right now is better than it was, but we are on the precipice of some really dramatic impacts, and that flywheel is spinning. We're not going to be able to turn it around. If you look at what's happening with coral reefs, if you look at what's happening with a number of critical species, if you look at what's happening with the basically biodiversity in the ocean, we're going to end up in a different mode. I would like to think that one of the main things that will happen in 50 years is that we will have stabilized in a different mode. And what I mean by that is right now, things are just changing. It is an unstable situation we're in right now. The mode we're in 50 years will not be the same as it was 20 years ago, but I would like to hope that it is a stable mode. So I'm sorry I don't have anything more specific than that, but I think it's a realistic view of what's happening in the environment with respect to climate change. And it really boils down to changing the awareness, getting out of some of these goofy conversations. Many of us are fond of pointing out that that legacy that you just alluded to was one that was started largely within a Republican administration, and it had at its heart a very conservative thrust to it. And so I think if we can understand, people talk about the existential threat of climate change, and folks just sort of don't understand what that means. It really is affecting our existence. And if people understand that, the redness and the blueness of the issues starts to go away. So I didn't mean to get too theological on you there on that one, but I do think that we will be in a stable mode, that we will be in a place where we are much more resilient than we are right now.
Absolutely. And so to that, I think that last, the keyword of resilience, the incredible amount of work that was put in over the past year and over future years for organizing the interagency effort around defining resilience for the federal family, making sure that products like NOAA, like those that NOAA is putting out, are fully servicing the needs of other federal partners as well as the public, is a crucial step in making sure that we are fully informed and making the right decision. So we really appreciate all the hard work that you and the team at NOAA are doing to make sure that that is fully underway and well informed. So thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Spinrad, and you're welcome to join us for the breakout sessions coming next, but no pressure. I know you're a really busy person, so you're free to jump off and enjoy your evening. But
thank
just
you.
a round of applause, and thank you so much for taking your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I do have to sign off, but thank you for giving me this much time, and really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the questions, and look forward to engaging with all of you down the line.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Cheers. Have a
Spinrad.
great night.